we're just eyeballing now.
Yeah. It's nothing.
Oh yeah, seat pan's gone, almost touching the crossmember right now.
Yeah.
So we definitely have to do something with that. Probably go ahead and just take that out completely.
That crossmember?
That crossmember until we get things figured out, because we're going to want to still try to put a back seat in this thing, right?
It's not mandatory.
Until we figure out where the drive shaft's going to be, and then we can make a new one that's no taller than it needs to be. Basically, just do a drive shaft loop in there. That's what kind of want to know at this point. So we'll have to see where that ends up, because it might end up working out. I don't know how high our height is going to be. Let me see. Well, we're at 12 inches there. Yeah, no.
Yeah, those horns are going to get cut off.
It's just I hope we can get past.
My hope was that we would cut this off and be able to put the hockey pucks on that and have it set on that.
Well, I'm just worrying about the front of this and the steering gear box, whether we're going to have enough room there.
Yeah.
To bring it low enough and still get the steering gear box in there without coming up with something else. So the other day, before we actually left the shop, we went ahead and just slid the chassis underneath it just to take a quick look, not an actual test fit. Because basically the only thing I had done was taken a measurement across here to see if it would fit within the rocker panels. I never actually looked at the overhangs to see how much we had here or at the other end to see would it actually fit within the trunk or not. And actually I'm going to have to take at least an inch off of here to get it within the trunk area. And I also wanted to check this here because I'm pretty sure that this is not going to work, and it's not. This sits way too high. It's going to go right through the back seat floor pan. So we're going to end up taking this out and building a custom crossmember here before it's all over and done with. So to get this thing sitting at the right height that we want it when we're done, and all the weight and everything on it with the engine, transmission, interior, and everything, we're estimating at this point that we want the rocker to be somewhere close to the bottom of the frame rail here, which means I still gotta get this thing to go down another 4 to 5 inches yet. But in order to get that thing to go down another 4 to 5 inches, we're gonna have to cut the front rails here, because we only got about 2 to 2.5 inches here. And right now we are sitting right on top of the steering box. And if I lower this thing another 4 to 5 inches, the steering box is going to be through the front valance, and we do not want to cut the front valance. We want this to stay. So I'm guessing that's probably what's going to happen here is we're going to get rid of that steering box, because that thing's been sitting open for 4 or 5 years out in the weather anyway, so it needs replaced no matter what. We're probably going to end up doing a steering rack conversion on this thing. So back here, currently it's sitting on top of these little brackets here that are for the original leaf spring shackles, but we need to go further than that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut across here and across the bottom of the rail and basically turn the box section into just an L so that it goes down over the rails, and we'll see what we get with that. Now I'll probably have to go ahead and put some kind of bracing in here because that's taken a bit more structure out. All right, well, we got all that trimmed out. So now let's give it a test fit and see how close we are. I also got the front of this cut off and the steering box removed, so we should be able to get pretty close to where we actually want to be. I keep getting a little closer and closer. Now I've got where the header fender rolls are hitting the A-arms here, so we're going to do some trimming there, get the front end down. And then the back, the frame rails are still really tight. And I'm going to have to do a little more massaging back in there, but I am done for tonight because it is 9 o'clock. The switch on my 4.5-inch grinder broke, and all the batteries for the cordless reciprocating saw are dead. So now that we got the body somewhat fitting the chassis, thought before we clean all this stuff out, this is all of the rusty metal that we've cut out of it so far, and other junk. And this is the third bag of just basically rust that's been falling out, animal nests, and other garbage. And we do have some potentially salvageable bits here, some of which we'll probably be reusing, but we'll figure that out as the project progresses. And then I got to do some more trimming back here. As it turns out, the width across here and the width of that chassis are way more similar than I would have ever expected. So now I need to get in here and trim off this flange and then trim these little bits here out so we can get it to sit around the chassis like we want it to. So now I got all those little bits trimmed out of the back here. The body just dropped right on the chassis nice and slick without hanging up anymore. And this is the height we're sitting at right now. But before I went any further with it, my buddy was out of town on a business trip and I wanted him to come back and for us to actually discuss how high does he really want this thing, or low, because his intention now was to go really low. But in order to get it low, we need to get the tires to tuck in. And now the wheels that are on it now are 15x7s, and with that offset that are on them, they're going to stick out no matter what, so we can't get it anywhere as low as we want it to. Plus, in the front here, there's just not enough room in the wheel wells to be able to turn the car with tires anywhere close to this size. And we need to get them to suck in some. So we wanted to discuss wheel options and see what we could come up with to fit on this thing. And after he looked at it, he kind of liked the kind of the higher look after all. When he was originally looking at doing this, his first thought was to do a gasser style or old school drag racer style. So now he's thinking going back more in that direction again, because in order to get it really slammed, it's a lot of work that we don't really want to do, because we don't want to modify the quarters or the fenders, and we don't want to cut all the wheel wells out. So we're going a little different direction, and we think we found a set of wheels that are going to work. So these are the wheels we come up with. So we're kind of doing the big and little thing. So it's a real kind of old school drag racer street rod look. And what we got is a set of Chevy Rally style wheels here. And he really liked the fact that they're silver, and they're not that far off of a silver from what would have been originally on this car from the factory. And now this is a dual bolt pattern wheel. It's got the Ford 4.5-inch bolt pattern and the Chevy 4 3/4. The rear wheels are a 15x7 with a 4 1/4-inch back spacing. And the front ones are 15x4 with a 2.5-inch back spacing. And I think the narrow 4-inch wheel will allow us to have full turning radius without rubbing the firewall and cutting a bunch of the inner fender wheel out. And the other nice thing about these things is, with a minor modification here, we can make the original MG hubcaps fit in here and use these, and he really, really likes that look. Now, if you like these wheels and you think they will work on your project, I'll put a link to Amazon for these wheels in the description. So before we finalize body mounting and how high it's sitting on the chassis, we want to figure out the right height of the chassis itself, and part of that is having those wheels. We're going to get tires on them next, but also we are going to play with the rear suspension a little bit. He already has shocks for this thing sitting on the shelf that are for a 2 to 4 inch drop, but this thing has been dropped 3.5 inches, but with blocks, which means those shocks don't actually work on this thing. And besides, the lower spring mounts that are on this thing are absolutely the wrong ones. I have no idea what they're for, but they're not S10. And we've ordered 3-inch lowered springs for it, and then we're going to adjust the block height to get what we want as a final ride height. And once we get there, then we'll figure out how we're going to mount everything. So now we got an engine sitting in the chassis, so we can start figuring out if it's going to fit, but this is not the engine that's going to go in this thing. This is an LT1 out of a 96 Caprice that I had laying in the corner of the shop. And I decided to use this as the mock-up to see if it's going to fit, rather than have him bring his engine and transmission over and just take up more room in my shop. I went ahead and took all the ancillaries off because we don't want any of that in place for now. And I'm using the mounts off the Caprice, because as I took some measurements and figured out where I thought it was going to have to sit, at least those would sit on the pads. Nothing bolts up, but it would sit on the pads. And these S10 V8 conversion mounts that came with the chassis, and yes, the thing that I said was weird about it was these were bolted directly to the chassis, and when these are the engine side mounts. But quick measurements here is if we tried to bolt this up, we'd have to slide the engine anywhere from 2.5 to 4 inches further forward to stay within this adjustment range once it's bolted in. So these are definitely not going to work for us. So we're going to have to try to figure out where the engine is going to sit final, so we know what to do for engine mounts, and see if we can get enough room for a radiator and how much into the firewall we're going to have to be in order for this to work, and if it even fits between the fender wells. I went ahead and took some measurements and made some marks on the chassis on both sides where the inner fender wells hit. So I took some measurements up to the top of the valve covers and back, and transferred all that to the car so I can cut that out to get clearance around the valve covers. And we can try to slide this thing underneath there and see if it fits here in a few minutes. But meanwhile, I went ahead and just found a piece of this strut from these shelves here where I was modifying those, and just put that across here and blocked it up to hold this up at a, pretty close to the angle it should be at. It's at 3 degrees right now, and it should be probably somewhere 3 to 5 degrees depending on what the actual pinion angle is. Too much, oh, missing teeth. That's why I won't do it. well once I cut this out. I ended up being lower on this side than on this side. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this out a little bit higher on this side so it matches that. And I went and picked myself up a brand new grinder yesterday. And yes, this is a $20 cheapie. I like the $20 cheapies for cutoff wheels. They don't have as much power, they don't spin quite as fast, but that's a good thing, because if you chunk a cutoff wheel or crack it and it flies apart, it doesn't fly apart with nearly as much force, so making them much safer to use as a cutoff wheel. All right, where we bump. All right, that's good. That's about right. Gonna cut that a little higher. But we're clearing most everything. There might be enough room to squeeze a radiator in here, but we're gonna have to probably trim this out here and get it just in front of the sway bar. And it's not quite as deep into the firewall as I feared it might end up when we first started this project. But it is going to be a bit tight to get some kind of exhaust in there. We'll just have to custom make some headers probably.